Hi, welcome to DAM and Digital Preservation, Beyond Metadata Standards, Ensuring Authenticity and Digital Provenance. Thank you for joining me today. There will be time at the end of the webinar for some questions and answers, so if you like, just go ahead and enter them now and we will get to them later. So in this webinar, I'm going to talk about how you can apply archival concepts to your DAM digital preservation strategy. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what digital preservation is, what goes into a DAM digital preservation strategy, and why your organization should have one in place. My name is Emily Kolvitz. I'm an MLIS candidate at the OU School of Library and Information Studies. So I have experience working on large-scale digital projects at the Oklahoma History Center and on various archives-related projects at the Carl Albert Center Congressional Archives. So I currently work at JCPenney, and I help manage the DAM for the marketing department. So one of the things that I'm most interested in as both a practitioner and a student is the disconnect between theory and practice that you can find in pretty much any field, but specifically within library and information studies, and of course within digital asset management. What that means is confronting ambiguity in description, rehoming orphaned records, and addressing the grayness of real-life information management. So what better to teach you about what is or what is not proper digital preservation than seeing it firsthand? I feel like we've already kind of made mistakes for future digital asset managers. We're going to make mistakes along the way, and it might even be necessary for us to understand what it means to preserve a digital object. As an industry, we spend a lot of time talking about selection of metadata standards and ensuring quality of metadata. Both very important aspects of DAM, however, they are also two very large topics that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on in this webinar. This webinar is definitely for those who already have a strong idea of what good metadata is, from standards to data integrity. We don't necessarily focus on how our daily workflows and procedures are affecting the integrity and authenticity of assets. This is unfortunate because lack of authenticity of records could have far-reaching implications, legal, ethical, and business-related consequences, which I will get to later in the webinar. So, what is digital preservation? How does it relate to DAM? The International Council on Archives suggests that digital preservation means that assets will remain accessible, intelligible, and usable, regardless of technology. It also means that their status remains reliable, accurate, and authentic. Integrity of assets and metadata affects your asset analytics, production, usage rights, and the story of the asset from creation to dissemination. Because of the transient and fragile nature of electronic records, without digital preservation, your metadata, your database, and your assets mean very little. So in this way, a digital preservation strategy means that you have sketched out the roadmap for how your assets are going to be used in your organization and how they will remain intelligible, accessible, and verifiable over time, regardless of technology. In layman's terms, it means your record retention schedules specifically address digital records in your contracts, in your departmental policies, and in your day-to-day dealings. So again, just to mention the consequences of not having a digital preservation strategy, I said previously that there could be legal, financial, and ethical issues. I have one very specific one that I'm going to highlight. So one very timely and telling sign that not everyone has all their ducks in a row on this one includes the IRS email scandal, where digital records were completely lost as a result of a hard drive failure. When I entered into graduate school, I most definitely had this idea that traditional archives were shining white beacons of truth, just as I've had the same sort of idea about DAM. So just get a DAM substitute archive, and you will have integrity of your assets, substitute records. But that could not be further from the truth. You don't need a DAM system for integrity. you need a strategy. And you need it because if you don't have it when you need it, you will, not can, end up in serious legal, financial, or ethical losses. So legal because you have been sued for violations in federal, local, or state law. Financial because you're behind your competition in terms of digital strategy. And ethical because you were not transparent in your dealings or perhaps did not understand the implications of inauthentic records, which is, in essence, negligence. When I read about the IRS email scandal, I was excited. That came out a little wrong. What I mean is information management, or rather lack thereof, got very national public attention all of a sudden. The thing we warn about the most finally happened, and at a national level. And then an archivist, and not just any archivist, the archivist of the United States publicly shamed them for not adhering to federal law. So maybe I was right the first time. I was excited. The point is, there are more IRS email scandals and lawsuits in our future. And there are also precautions that we can take as practitioners. So these are 4 preemptive strategies for digital preservation that I have compiled here. They are repurposing funds, knowing the metadata, using all available resources, and using your departmental or organizational record retention policies in the development of your preservation strategy. So the first one, repurposing funds or lawsuit budgets to preventative maintenance instead of reactional maintenance. For example, use that money for a proper archiving solution. The second one, knowing the metadata. Know the embedded metadata. Know the data fields in your database. Know what data comes into and leaves your dam. 3, partner with other information management stakeholders in your organization. So this is going back to using all your resources. Especially if it's a large organization, there are more than likely other information management professionals who you can draw on their experience and possibly some of their policy documents that already live in your organization. Which leads me to the next one. Update your departmental or organizational records retention policies to include a digital preservation strategy. They may not have been updated in a long time. So if you're the one that finds this, guess what? You have a new project. And obviously there are other stakeholders who are going to benefit from updating these policies. Digital preservation theory urges practitioners to create the metadata record as close to the time of record creation as possible. Vendors spend a lot of time talking about return on investment for digital asset management systems, but not necessarily the consequences of not having a proper DAM digital preservation strategy. And I think that there's an opportunity there because return on investment is it's an easy sell. Look how much money we're going to save. This is really going to help us in the long run. It's very positive, motivating. You get buy-in. Fair can do that too. So what's going to happen if we don't have this strategy? I'm sure many of you are familiar with Murphy's Law. So the more sophisticated the technology, the more catastrophic when it fails. On the other hand, there is Zipf's principle of the least amount of effort. So this is user behavior right here. Everyone will put in the least amount of effort that yields the highest return on investment. A good DAM digital preservation strategy could capitalize on the antithesis of Murphy's Law and the ease of Zipf's Law, yielding the hybrid law of the more sophisticated the technology, the greater return on investment when it succeeds with the least amount of effort. But people don't write stories about how great a business's digital preservation strategy is. People write stories when people lose emails, or when there is no digital strategy whatsoever. And I think after this webinar, it will be overwhelmingly apparent that a digital preservation strategy might require more than minimal effort. So sorry about that. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's the kind of thing that you get out what you put into it. So what exactly is a digital preservation strategy? What does it entail? What are the requirements for ensuring authenticity, digital provenance, and proper digital preservation of your digital assets? The following definition is one that I have kind of combined from my understanding of digital preservation and also from the ICA's digital preservation modules. Digital preservation strategy is holistic, technologically, and environmentally neutral. It has metadata requirements that are expected to be applied at or near the time of creation, and it is not focused on specific standards. The strategy requires context and curation, and is supplemented with digital preservation procedures and recommendations that will invariably change with time. So with that in mind, I hand-selected 4 archival concepts and how they can easily translate to digital asset management. Provenance, the records lifecycle, inventory, and selection and appraisal, which is actually 2 things. So the first one, provenance. This is the traditional description of provenance from SAA. So provenance is a fundamental principle of archives, referring to the individual, family, or organization that created or received the items in a collection. The principle of provenance, or the respect défense, dictates that records of different origins be kept separate to preserve their context. Gives you information for the history of the asset. And for works in progress DM environments, this type of arrangement can come about very naturally. So think job ticketing, campaign, etc. So to support findability in these types of environments, records aren't arranged necessarily according to brand or content type, the kinds of things you'll see on websites for shopping and such. So these would be facets to search on, but the physical arrangement would more readily reflect the initial business need. So this is one way to retain authenticity. When I worked at the Carl Albert Center Congressional Archives in Norman, I learned firsthand how to properly retain a body of records. So you keep the records under the organizing body in which they were created. If a congressman or woman created these records under office during a specific time period, then that's the roadmap for their hierarchy. You map out who created the records, the relationships, the various offices, congresses, titles, subjects, periods in office, campaigns, and biographies. The richness of the record is enhanced when you know the context of the story. Respect défense can add to the integrity of your dam in a way that almost no other facet can. So an asset abstracted from its body of records loses meaning, context, and therefore authenticity. When you have folder-level description for assets and specific item-level description, the item outside of its folder can mean different things, especially in works in progress environments where the folder name, and item and folder-level description all give context in addition to file info, file history, other metadata, and usage details. Ultimately, the questions are, what makes sense to the organization? What promotes findability? How will users seek out assets during content creation? And more importantly, in retrospect, who will our users be in 10 years? Have we thought this far ahead? And what is the lifespan of a dam? So the second archival concept I'm going to speak to a little here is the records lifecycle. So the lifecycle of records includes the creation, use, both primary and secondary, storage, and disposal of records. So what are your retention schedules for dams? what are your departmental policies for record keeping? More than likely, they have already been drafted, and you just need to tailor them to your unit. An easy way to compare this to traditional archives is that the most often used records will more than likely stay on site. So that means that you can utilize your DAM usage stats to curate your retention policies and archive schedules, in addition to already constructed departmental policies for record retention. It could also be possible that your business unit will need to update or revise the existing record retention schedules, especially if they have not been updated for some time. The third archival concept I'm going to talk about is inventory, and I actually mean it in two different ways here. You should be taking inventory every once in a while, both inside and outside of your DAM. For assets in your DAM, but also in your organization, assets can be in your DAM, or they can be on the server, on SharePoint. They can be in a lot of places. So what I'm suggesting here is what else is out there, what could be ingested in your DAM. So in a way, knowing what other records are out there for inclusion into your DAM is almost a type of donor relations, where you're identifying the records of enduring value for your organization. The internal business owners are the donors, or perhaps the organization itself. And the other type of inventory I was speaking to was doing an audit of your existing body of records or assets, their arrangement, and their description. So that's an opportunity to reevaluate your schema, continually prune the collection, and update or add to existing description. Finally, I'm going to talk about selection and appraisal. These are shaped by context, culture, and business rules. It can go hand in hand with the inventory, but it's more geared towards actual selection of what you want to keep. So, Society of American Archivists defines selection as the process of identifying materials to be preserved because of their enduring value, especially those materials to be physically transferred to an archives. So, what is worthy of being digitally preserved? There is an important distinction to be made pertaining to selection. So, who is governing what does or does not go into the DAM? Does everything have enduring value? Are you an asset hoarder? Selection policies can be outlined in your digital preservation policy document, which can safeguard you from ingesting records that are garbage or of no use to the organization and that do not fulfill your departmental or organizational missions. A selection policy very quickly can help you determine whether or not an asset belongs in your collection. SAA also defines appraisal as the process of identifying materials offered to an archives that have sufficient value to be accessioned. So what is worthy of potentially being accessioned and digitally preserved? Even after determining that a body of assets or records fit within your collection scope, it does not mean that all will be accessioned, and you still have to determine for how long, who will access them, and how they will be described. These curation policies will be shaped by your organizational culture, business rules, and departmental policies, or they will be shaped by chaos. There is an opportunity here for you to meet with your legal team and/or other departmental stakeholders to determine what the legal or business requirements for custodianship of these assets are throughout their life cycles. So winding down here towards the end, I hope I haven't overwhelmed anyone with all of the things that could go into a digital preservation strategy. To be clear, a first step to ensuring authenticity of your assets includes a thorough audit of your existing metadata, procedures, and policies for ensuring authenticity over time. From there, you can identify what needs to go into your policy document for your DAM digital preservation strategy. I would suggest keeping it short and sweet. A lengthy policy document can be kind of overwhelming to read for some people, and also people have short attention spans. So in the beginning, a one-page document outlining the steps you need to take to ensure authenticity is a really good starting point. From there, you can build on it, just like you build a DAM up. You're going to start, very small and build from there. So I think some of the resources for building this document Definitely, you're going to be using a lot of resources to inform your digital preservation strategy. I have some recommendations here. So the first is the Dam Foundation's Dam Maturity Model and the Enterprise Dam Checklist. Your existing departmental or organizational record retention policies. Jen Riley's Metadata Universe. Sustainability of digital file formats guidelines from digitalpreservation.gov. And finally, the ICA's digital preservation modules, which are 8 freely available educational modules for information professionals. I've taken these myself. I highly recommend them. I learned a whole lot. And it also has case studies and critical thinking questions. So some of these resources will help inform the policy, and others will help inform the procedures that will ultimately affect digital longevity and authenticity of your assets, regardless of the system that you put them in. So thank you guys for listening. I'd love to take some questions at this time. Feel free to send me an email if you have any questions, thoughts, or any comments. You can also reach me on Twitter and also on LinkedIn. I don't have that up on my slide, but I'm the only Emily Kolvitz, so just search for me. So let's see if we have any questions. First one, any quick start recommendations for dam managers who don't have archivist backgrounds? I kind of highlighted some of those earlier, so Dam Foundation most definitely would be a good starting point. There's also a LibGuide through the Dam Foundation that you can get to that have a ton of resources, so that would be my recommendation, and in addition to everything I also mentioned previously. Okay, we have another question. Are there any particular features we should look for in a dam to make it more suitable for preservation? Yes, absolutely. Metadata inheritance is one of them. You want to make sure the dam system you're putting your assets into is not changing metadata that you don't want to change. So that's another reason to do an audit of your metadata, because there might be things happening at the file level in the embedded metadata that you don't even know about, because all you ever look at is the data fields in the database and they look fine. So very recently I discovered something like this with a copyright field, which I don't know if anyone else has had experience with, but essentially the tag for just the copyright flag in the EXIF was saying unmarked, which when you open that in Photoshop means public domain. Hopefully you want your image to be public domain, because if not, you got to go fix all those images. So that's one very specific example of things you want to look out for and mitigate. You want to know the embedded metadata, and then also what is in your database. Is there a specific schema you would recommend for preservation? You could do Dublin Core, there's Primus. You could also do a custom schema with the fields that you find most applicable, which is the recommendation of a lot of practitioners, is to start with Dublin Core and then branch out from there. But there are specific standards geared just at preservation metadata, which you can find in that big graph of Jen Riley's Metadata Universe. You can inspect that further. But yeah, there's definitely a lot, but none that I personally recommend. I definitely think Dublin Core and branch out from there. Any tips for getting an organization to understand the importance of investing in this area? So I kind of hit on this a little earlier. I think that we should motivate them with fear, like the IRS email scandal, and not with any kind of return on investment. Definitely fear. This is not, oh, it's so nice to have files that have integrity. It's great because we know we can rely on the data in our systems. Yes, that's important. Yes, that's a sell for us. But for upper management, maybe a news line is a better motivator. It's kind of like parenting. You can't always reward and do positive reinforcement. Sometimes you have to do negative reinforcement. Are there sample preservation strategy documents for a business? Yes. go to ICA-SAE.com, I think is the address. That's going to take you to the International Council on Archives digital preservation modules. I was saying earlier that they had case studies and critical thinking questions. They also have examples of policy documents. They also have outlined what you need in a policy document. So definitely check that out. Let's see if we have any more questions. Are there laws governing how a dam can or should be used for this, or is it up to each institution? Yes, there are laws governing record retention policies. You need to look them up. They're going to vary by state, and then there's also national laws that you can look at, such as the Freedom of Information Act. And what I would recommend here is looking them up for yourself, but also if you have a records manager in your organization or a legal department and or both, partner with them, talk to them about what you can do, and you can go from there. But yeah, it is up to each institution, but there are laws, most definitely, specifically about how many copies you can have of things, how long you have to keep certain documents for, etc. So we have another question. How and why did you get interested in all of this? I guess from working in archives, it was easy to see how you can preserve a physical, tangible documents. And we had this conversation one day about a senator's hard drive and how you would digitally preserve that and how you would share it with your users, because you don't want anyone to modify the hard drive. So it would probably have to be an emulation or some way to lock the file from being altered. You don't want to open it because that's going to change the date on the file. So that was really hard for me to deal with because we were so not even in the digital space in the archives. We were still processing a physical collection, and I just got very interested in how long digital objects will last and what we can do as practitioners to increase their lifespan. I don't know if any of you have any floppy disks left. I've come across a few every time I move, and I think, oh, I'm going to look at that. Well, I don't have a computer that I can put them in anymore. And further, I doubt there's still anything on them. Or if there is, I don't even know if it will open on my computer. So I think that's all the questions. Thank you for listening today, and goodbye for now.